this summer, I'm on the hunt for affordable, high-quality hand planes that anybody can just go on the internet and order. And I'll tell you what, this hunt cannot be over soon enough for me. If you've been tuning in to the Woodwork for Humans series, you saw me make this quick, basic shooting board and shoot some boards straight and square with my inexpensive 12404 hand plane. And I gotta tell you, I am just about fed up with this thing. Not only is it weak and chintzy and difficult to adjust, it is not square. It is really not square, and that makes it very difficult to shoot square edges with it. So as much as I've really enjoyed working with and fixing up the 12404 plane, it's just reached the end of its useful life. Even for our ultra basic Woodwork for Humans projects, it is time to step up to something more professional. And luckily, I think I found something. I've actually found two somethings. This is the Grizzly 10-inch smoothing plane, and this is the Bighorn 19316 adjustable smoothing bench jack plane. Hey marketing guys, did you get enough words in there? You get enough? And you might notice that these two planes look similar. Surprisingly similar. And they also look surprisingly good for the price. So I had to know where they were made and where they came from, and I did a lot of research. And it turns out that both of these planes were manufactured by a company called Soba Industries in, wait for it, Delhi, India. It turns out that India is actually a manufacturer of some very high-quality woodworking hand tools. Oh, and they're also the world's largest democracy. So, yeah, good job, India. Okay, so these two planes are not identical, but they are extremely similar. For instance, the frog's adjusting mechanisms, handles, and bodies are identical. Now, the lever caps are a little bit different. This one has a screw mechanism and this one has a cam lever, but aside from that, they're both made out of chromed cast iron and they even have the same tool marks on them. Now, the real giveaway with both of these planes is the frog adjustment screw. It's a really unusual design that I've never seen before. It's identical on both these planes, and it exactly matches the planes in the Soba Industries catalog. That's how I know that these came from the same factory and which factory they came from. But despite all these similarities, they're not exactly the same, and the differences are significant enough that I want to look at them separately. Let's start with this one. This is the Bighorn bench smoothing jack Cuisinart, whatever. And I bought this for $37 with free shipping. Now weirdly, in the 2 or 3 weeks since I bought this, the price has shot up to $50, which is a big jump. But it's really nothing to worry about, because this exact same plane is sold under a number of different brand names. So in addition to Bighorn, you can also grab this under the Draper and Faithful names, or if you're in the UK, you can get it under the Spear and Jackson name. No matter which brand you buy, they all come in at about $45, $46 after shipping, and they are the same except for minor cosmetic details. So it doesn't seem to matter which brand you buy. Shop around, find the best deal, and pull the trigger on the one that's cheapest. I will leave links to all of these down in the description. So for under $50 with free shipping, you cannot expect these planes to work straight out of the box. You're gonna have to do some preparation to them. I'm gonna get started with the Bighorn, which was the less expensive when I bought it. This is pretty much a straightforward copy of a basic Stanley plane from like the Sweetheart or post-war era. Here is my day-to-day user for comparison, and you can tell these are almost exactly the same plane. What I particularly like about the Bighorn is that it's got the cam lever on the cap, very quick and easy to adjust, and the big adjustment wheel, which you can grab really easily, and it spins super smoothly. That makes adjusting the blade depth very easy. Preparing this plane is really straightforward. I started by checking that the sides are square to the base, and they're very square, so this plane is going to make an effective shooting plane. Now right off the jump, I noticed that the handle was loose, and I couldn't tighten it anymore, no matter how hard I turned it with a screwdriver. So I took off the attachment bolt and ground it just a little bit shorter on my bench grinder. That gave me the clearance I needed to tighten that thing down a lot harder and get that handle to be rock solid. It was a quick fix, and now that problem is solved. Next, I checked the bottom by coloring in the sole of the plane with a Sharpie, all the way from toe to heel, and then giving it a couple of rubs on sandpaper stuck to some glass. Now what I see here is that the bottom is pretty flat. This would probably work okay straight out of the package. I've seen planes with very uneven soles, lots of high and low spots. This has two pronounced high spots on either side, but they run the full length of the plane, and it's just a little bit hollow in the middle. That's pretty good. I can just keep grinding that on the sandpaper stuck to glass until the entire bottom is smooth and polished. It only takes me about 5 minutes, and the bottom of this plane is good to go. Next, I'm going to look at the iron and the cap iron. Now, the iron needs to be flat and polished for about the first ½ inch on the back. This is very important for the plane's performance. And I have to say, the iron here was a little bit disappointing. Not only was it very much not flat, it also had really heavy tool marks and a pronounced hollow in the middle of the iron. So I had to spend a lot of time grinding this on sandpaper, and I finally finished it up with a diamond hone to get a flat and polished section on the back for the chip breaker to mate to. This part is annoying, but I also think this is where some of your cost savings are coming in. If they were doing this preparation work at the factory, your cost for this plane would go way up. So doing it yourself is part of how you're going to get this plane at an affordable price. I was actually kind of happy to see that it took me a while to grind away that hollow on the back of the iron, because that means that iron is hard and tough. It seems like good quality steel. And given the choice, I'd rather they give me a good piece of steel and let me take the time to prepare it. That's fine with me. The cap iron for this plane was kind of like the iron. It was a little bit rough, so I ground a knife edge on the bottom and then smoothed and refined the whole thing, both with sandpaper and with my oil stones. While I was there, I honed and sharpened the bevel of the iron, also on my oil stones. Then I mated together the iron and the cap iron, which is also called the chip breaker, and I checked to make sure that there was no light passing between the two of them. This tells me that I have an excellent solid mating surface between them, and chips aren't going to get stuck in there and jam the plane. With all this done, it was time to actually test the plane, and I did that in a variety of ways. I tried it on the edge of a board, where it gave me an excellent surface and light, feathery shavings. I took off the corners of that board, and the plane was good at that. It handled easily and wasn't too heavy. I did face grain on highly figured wood, and again, I got excellent shavings and a very smooth, shimmery surface. This would be ready for finishing if I needed it to be. And then I plowed the plane through some tough end grain, and it cut very well, better than really any block plane I've ever owned, and just as good as my other planes. Overall, the performance of this plane was excellent, and I have no complaints. Now, onto the Grizzly plane. It is extremely similar to the Bighorn plane. A couple of quick differences. First of all, it's got a powder-coated body, this thin, flat, matte coating on it, instead of the thick, shiny paint on the Bighorn. You wouldn't think this would matter, but the Bighorn is already showing chipping and flaking just from a couple days in the shop, whereas this powder coat is still 100% undamaged. So that seems like a decent feature. The other big difference is that the chip breaker on the Grizzly is a more advanced and robust design. Instead of just taking a thin piece of sheet metal and stamping it into a curve, the manufacturer made the chip breaker with a machined knife edge along the top. This is a surprisingly high-end feature for a budget plane to have. You typically only see this on something like a Veritas plane. And I'm really surprised that the manufacturer was willing to put in this extra time and effort for a plane that you get for $50 shipped. Now, preparing this plane was almost identical to preparing the Bighorn. I flattened the bottom, and it had the exact same level of flatness, good on both edges, hollow in the middle, about 5 minutes to fix. I flattened the iron, and it was the same deal as the other one. Heavy machine marks, very hollow in the middle, kind of tedious to get fixed, but once it's done, you'll probably never have to do it again. The machined chip breaker was very well done and crisp, but the edge of it was kind of rough, so I spent some time refining and polishing that on the sandpaper and on my oil stones. I checked that for a fit and also honed and polished the bevel of the iron while I was at it. I sharpened this plane and the other one to my usual smoothing plane setup with just a light camber across the iron. With all this work done, I ran the Grizzly through the exact same tests that I used on the Bighorn. I did edges, faces, and end grain, and this plane performed almost exactly the same way. Easy to use, good surfaces, held its edge really well. A really solid plane altogether. So at this point, I'm sure you're thinking, okay, these planes are basically identical, I should just find whichever one is cheaper and buy it. And I wish it was that simple, but it isn't. I've been using both of these planes for a couple of days, and I've noticed a pretty significant problem with the Bighorn, the cheaper of the two of them. When I did my initial tests, I did all of them using a very light setting of the blade, because that's what I use most often in my day-to-day work. But I'll also use a medium setting and even a heavy setting for quick stock removal, depending on what I'm doing. It's one of the reasons I like a mechanically adjustable plane. I can get a bunch of different cuts with minimum screwing around. As I was testing this plane further, and I went for a medium cut or a heavy cut, the plane just wouldn't do it. The iron just wouldn't advance to more than a very light cut, which was puzzling to me because this seemed like a really great plane overall. I took it apart and I realized the problem was that the screw that holds the iron and the cap iron together was bottoming out in its space in the chip breaker. It just couldn't travel far enough forward. This bummed me out for a minute, but then I thought, this isn't really a big deal. I'll just mark the spot where it's hitting, take that over to my bench grinder, grind away a little bit of metal, reinstall that screw, and it shouldn't be a problem. And I did get plenty of travel at that point. But I still couldn't get the blade to advance much further. And I noticed that the blade adjusting fork was actually slipping off the adjusting wheel as it got more towards the end of its travel. Okay, that's not a huge problem. This is made of stamped steel, so I just grabbed a pair of pliers, squeezed that thing together for a better fit, and it didn't slip off anymore. And I still couldn't take a heavier shaving with this plane. And what I finally figured out is that the adjustment fork, which has a little bit of a divot coming out of it that engages with the chip breaker, well, that little divot is too short and it's not shaped very well. So it doesn't engage with the chip breaker the way it needs to. As the chip breaker and iron get further down their travel, this little divot just slips out of the adjustment hole and it won't connect anymore. So it literally can't push the blade out further. And this is, I don't know, kind of a problem, honestly. The whole point of having a plane like this is to be able to make several different cuts and get different adjustments quickly and easily. Now, this plane is good enough in general, and these planes have a good enough reputation that I'd be willing to bet this is just a quality control issue. I just got one that was bad in some way. That's totally fine. If you can find one of these, and it's at a good price, and you can return it, I would still think buying just whichever one is the cheaper is totally fine. This is the Bighorn, the cheaper one that you can tell is cheaper because it has paint on the body. The more expensive, powder-coated Grizzly plane, on the other hand, has none of these issues. And it's clear that in the factory they paid more attention to the adjuster. The adjustment fork is already really well fitted to the adjustment wheel. It can't slip off. It's also chromed, whereas the one on the Bighorn is just plain metal and it's already quite rusty. This one is shiny and in perfect condition. And then the divot that sticks up and engages with the chip breaker is longer and has sharper, better defined corners on this one. So it doesn't lose contact with that hole as it's engaged forward. Overall, it just works better. And here's what I think is going on here. I think that Soba makes at least two models of this plane. This is more or less the base model that generally sells for less money, and this is the higher end model. It's sold by Grizzly and maybe a couple other places. I'm still doing some research on this, and it typically costs a few bucks more. But the difference in the quality of the planes is actually pretty significant. The Grizzly cuts better, works better. The knife edge chip breaker isn't like revolutionary or anything, but it's good and it is easier and quicker to prepare. Overall, this is a better plane and it costs about the same. So I really think what most people want to do is lean towards the Grizzly model, higher end version of this plane. It is excellent bang for the buck. So as much as I like this Grizzly plane, I'm not ready to tell you to just go out and buy it and that's the end of the story. There are a lot of inexpensive hand planes out there on the internet, and I need to try at least a few more of them. So I'm going to do one more video where I try a couple more inexpensive hand plane models, and then at the end of the summer, a big shootout testing video where I figure out which plane or planes gives you the best bang for your buck. At the end of the summer, I'm also going to be releasing my guide to finding, buying, and fixing up inexpensive budget hand planes that you can buy on the internet. That guide will be available at rexkruger.com, and if you like, you can go there right now and check out t-shirts, hoodies, and plans for a lot of the projects that I've made. And before I go, I've always got to thank my patrons on Patreon. Not only do they make all of these videos possible with their support, they provide the funding that lets me buy things like this plane. When most YouTubers want to review a product like a tool, they contact the manufacturer and ask to get one, usually for free. And yeah, those companies will send a free model of that tool to check out, but let's be honest, nothing's really free in life. If somebody gives you something expensive for nothing, they might want something in return. Well, I don't have to worry about any of that. When I want to review a tool, I buy it out of pocket, and my patrons are the ones who make that possible. If you'd like to be a part of making these fun DIY videos, go on over to patreon.com/RexKruger and check out the early access, rewards, and benefits that I have only for my patrons. They're the ones who make all of this possible. And if you're just watching because you want to see which plane I pick, if you're just enjoying my content, that's great. I love having viewers. Thanks so much for watching.